keep doing
"Shut up,
concussions.
cowboy, you're freezing. You're sleeping between us tonight," the two
I
Apache
am. I
sisters
don't feel a
said.
pulse.
The night was unusually cold. The wind swept across the open land with a force that made the tall grasses sway violently, and the stars above shone brightly in the clear sky, almost as if they were watching silently. On the edge of this vast, empty space, a young cowboy trudged forward, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. Every step was hard, not just because of the uneven earth beneath him, but because of the weight of the day and the fatigue pressing down on his shoulders. His coat, thick as it was, could not protect him fully from the biting wind that seemed determined to pierce every layer of warmth he had. He pulled the collar up around his neck and tried to focus on the path ahead, but the cold made even that simple task difficult. He had been riding all day, guiding cattle across the rough terrain, making sure none of them wandered off. His hands were raw from handling ropes, and his eyes stung from the sharp air. Despite all this, he carried on because he had learned long ago that complaining did nothing. Strength, he thought, was in enduring. Yet this night tested him more than any before. Even the stars seemed distant, their cold light only reminding him of how alone he truly was on this open land. He had always been alone, relying on himself for everything, and that had always felt like a point of pride. But tonight, something about the darkness, the wind, and the quietness made him question that pride. Not far from where he walked, two sisters watched him. They had known him for several years, though not very closely. He wasn't part of their family, but they had seen him enough to notice things about him that no one else did. The older sister, with her sharp eyes and calm demeanor, noticed how he walked with a slight limp, the way he hugged himself to try to keep warm. The younger sister, with her playful spirit, noticed the way he tried to hide his shivering behind a forced grin. They had seen him face challenges before, but this night looked different. He didn't just look tired, he looked beaten down by the cold, by the endless miles, and maybe even by life itself. The sisters shared a quiet look. Neither of them needed to speak to understand the other. They had grown up learning to read people, to know when someone needed help even if they didn't say a word. And tonight, the young cowboy clearly needed help. Yet there was something about him, something stubborn and proud, that made it obvious he wouldn't ask for it. That stubbornness reminded the sisters of themselves in many ways. They had faced hardships that demanded resilience, but they had also learned that sometimes pride must give way to care. Tonight, they decided they would not let him face this cold alone. The cowboy continued to move forward, unaware of their presence. His breaths came out in sharp puffs that disappeared quickly into the night. His hat was pulled low over his face, but the wind still found its way to sting his cheeks. He wrapped his arms tightly around his torso, wishing silently for a fire, a blanket, or even a simple gesture of warmth from another human being. But he had convinced himself long ago that asking for help was a weakness, so he pressed on in silence, letting the cold bite as it would. The sisters stepped closer, their footsteps quiet against the frozen earth. They didn't call out to him immediately. Instead, they watched, waiting for the right moment. There was a rhythm to the night, the wind, the distant sounds of animals settling for the night, and the soft crunch of the cowboy's boots. In that quiet, even the smallest sound felt amplified. The younger sister whispered almost to herself, "He's freezing." Her older sister nodded, her eyes softening. "He doesn't even know we're here," she replied, but the decision was already made. Pride aside, no one should face such cold alone, and they would not let him do so tonight. Finally, they approached him slowly so as not to startle him. When he noticed them, he straightened slightly, trying to regain his composure. "Evening," he said, his voice rough from the cold and from speaking too little throughout the day. The sisters didn't respond immediately with words. Instead, they offered small gestures, a blanket draped over his shoulder, a warm nod, a look that said, "It's okay to accept help." At first, he hesitated. He wanted to say no, to push them away politely but firmly. But the warmth of the blanket, the concern in their eyes, and the quiet sincerity in their actions made him pause. For the first time in a long while, he considered letting someone in, even just for a little while. The older sister broke the silence first, her voice firm yet caring. "Shut up, cowboy," she said, a teasing note in her tone to cover the seriousness beneath. "You're freezing. You're sleeping between us tonight." The words were simple, almost playful, but the meaning was profound. She wasn't mocking him, she was protecting him. The younger sister smiled softly, adding, "You've earned it whether you want to admit it or not." The cowboy blinked, caught off guard by both their words and the genuine care behind them. He wanted to protest, to insist that he didn't need anyone, but the cold was relentless, and the warmth of their concern felt too comforting to ignore. As they settled near him, the wind seemed to lose some of its bite. The stars still shone coldly above, but around the three of them there was a small pocket of warmth, a sense of safety that had nothing to do with the weather. They didn't speak much after that, letting the quiet night wrap around them like a soft blanket. In that silence, the cowboy felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, even if it was just for this one night. The sisters didn't need to explain themselves. They didn't need to lecture him about asking for help or show him pity. Their presence alone was enough to remind him that sometimes endurance doesn't mean facing the world alone. Sometimes it means letting others share the burden, even in silence. Throughout the night, small moments filled the darkness. The younger sister hummed softly, a tune that reminded the cowboy of distant memories he had long forgotten. The older sister occasionally adjusted the blanket around him, making sure he stayed warm without making him feel embarrassed. He found himself sharing stories, little by little, about the day's journey, about the land, about things he hadn't spoken about in years. Each word felt easier to say when spoken in the quiet comfort of the sisters' company. The wind still howled outside, but within their small circle it felt distant and powerless. As hours passed, the night grew deeper and the cold continued to press in from the outside. But the cowboy no longer felt alone. He realized that strength was not just about enduring hardship silently. Sometimes, it was about allowing oneself to be human, to feel warmth, and to accept care from others. The sisters, in turn, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that their simple act of kindness had made a difference. They didn't need gratitude or grand gestures. Seeing him relax, seeing him lower the walls he had built around himself, was enough. By the time dawn approached, the first hints of sunlight began to stretch across the horizon. The sky shifted from deep blue to soft shades of pink and gold, painting the land with hope. The cowboy looked around, noticing the vastness of the world once more, but he no longer felt small or isolated. The night had been harsh, but it had also been transformative. He understood something new. That connection, compassion, and the willingness to accept help could carry a person further than any stubborn pride ever could. The sisters remained by his side, smiling quietly, their presence a reminder that kindness could exist even in the harshest of places. And so, the night ended, not just with the passing of hours, but with the quiet birth of trust, understanding, and warmth. It was a night that the cowboy would remember forever, a night that proved that even the coldest moments could be softened by the care of others. The wind would continue to blow, the land would remain vast and challenging, but he had learned a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes, survival is not about fighting alone, but about letting others stand beside you. The night had passed, and the first rays of sunlight were beginning to stretch across the horizon, painting the land in soft shades of gold and pink. The cold had not fully gone, but it felt less harsh now. The cowboy, still wrapped in the warmth of the sisters' blankets, stirred slightly. He had slept better than he had in many nights, not just because of the warmth, but because for once he felt accepted. He had always believed that showing weakness was dangerous, that needing others was a sign of failure. But sitting there with the two sisters, he realized that trust could be comforting, even healing. The older sister, sitting beside him, noticed the slight change in his demeanor. He no longer appeared tense. The stiffness in his shoulders had softened. She smiled quietly to herself, remembering the first time she had seen him trying to hide his struggles. He had always been proud, determined to face hardships alone, but tonight had shown her that even the strongest people sometimes needed help. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she reached out and offered him a small cup of warm tea they had prepared, the aroma soothing in the chilly morning air. The cowboy accepted it hesitantly, holding the cup with both hands, feeling the heat seep into his cold fingers. The younger sister leaned against a nearby rock, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she were reading the land itself. She had always been observant, noticing things others overlooked. "You didn't have to pretend with us last night," she said softly. "We know what it's like to carry too much alone." Her words were gentle but carried the weight of experience. She, too, had faced hardships and had learned that strength was not in isolation, but in knowing when to accept support. The cowboy listened quietly, a mixture of surprise and contemplation in his eyes. He wasn't used to hearing words that were both kind and honest without judgment. The sisters began to talk about themselves, sharing stories of their childhood and the lessons they had learned growing up. The older sister spoke of their family, their traditions, and the values they held dear. She described how their parents had taught them resilience, not through harsh words, but through example, showing them the importance of helping others and standing together in times of need. The younger sister added stories of mischief, small victories, and lessons learned the hard way. The cowboy listened intently, feeling a sense of connection he had rarely experienced. Their stories were simple, yet they carried depth and meaning, revealing the strength of character that came from facing life's challenges with courage and compassion. As the morning light grew stronger, the cowboy felt a shift within himself. He had always prided himself on being independent, on facing challenges without relying on anyone. Yet, the night with the sisters had opened his eyes to a new kind of strength, the strength in connection, in sharing burdens, and in accepting kindness without shame. He realized that his pride had often been a barrier, keeping him from forming meaningful relationships and from finding comfort when he needed it most. The sisters, in their quiet way, had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness, but a part of being human. The three of them moved slowly through the land, the cowboy now walking between the sisters as they guided him toward a small clearing where the morning sun hit first. The wind had softened, and the sounds of the land waking up surrounded them, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant murmur of a stream. The sisters shared observations about the land, pointing out familiar trails, hidden water sources, and signs of wildlife. The cowboy began to see the land not as a place to conquer or survive in isolation, but as a living world full of lessons, beauty, and connection. He felt a deep respect for the sisters and the way they understood the land, and he realized how much he had underestimated the value of listening and learning from others. Throughout the morning, small moments of warmth and humor surfaced. The younger sister teased the cowboy about his stiff way of walking after the night spent in the cold, making him laugh despite himself. The older sister joined in, gently mocking his stubbornness in a way that felt affectionate rather than cruel. Laughter, he realized, was another form of warmth, one that could melt more than just the chill of the air. He felt lighter, as if a part of the heaviness he had carried for so long was finally lifting. The sisters didn't push him to speak more than he wanted, but their presence encouraged him to open up naturally, sharing small stories about his life, his work, and his dreams. Each story, each laugh, each moment of silence shared in comfort built a bond stronger than any he had known before. As the day progressed, the sisters noticed the cowboy's natural skills with animals and the land. He moved with quiet confidence, showing respect for the creatures around him and understanding the subtle signs that indicated danger or opportunity. They watched him work, guiding the horses with patience and care, handling the cattle with an intuitive understanding that came from experience. They admired his strength, not in the sense of brute force, but in the quiet resilience he demonstrated. Yet they also saw the moments where he hesitated, where fatigue or doubt crept in. And in those moments they were there, not to judge but to support, to offer a steady presence that made him feel less alone. The cowboy, in turn, began to notice things about the sisters he had not seen before. Their courage, their intelligence, their ability to face life's challenges without complaint, it inspired him. He realized that strength came in many forms and that he had spent too long thinking of it in narrow terms. The sisters were not just kind. They were wise, resilient, and deeply connected to the world around them. Being with them made him reflect on his own life, his choices, and the ways he could grow. It was a quiet awakening, one that didn't need words to be understood, but which would leave a lasting impression on his heart and mind. By mid-morning, the trio reached a small stream where the water ran clear and cold. They stopped to rest, the cowboy kneeling by the water to drink, feeling the crisp liquid refresh him. The sisters watched him with quiet satisfaction, knowing that these moments of simple care, warm tea, shared blankets, a steady presence, were changing him in ways he might not even realize yet. He began to speak more openly now, asking questions about the land, the animals, and the sisters' lives. They answered patiently, encouraging curiosity and reflection. It was not a formal lesson, but a natural exchange of knowledge and trust. In these moments, the cowboy felt a sense of belonging that was rare and precious, a sense that he was part of something larger than himself, if only for a brief time. As the sun climbed higher, the air warmed slightly, and the wind softened. The trio continued their journey, moving with a sense of purpose that was calm rather than hurried. The cowboy no longer felt the same urgency to prove himself or to endure in silence. He had learned, through simple acts of care and the quiet power of companionship, that strength was not about being unyielding, but about being open to connection, to trust, and to the support of others. The sisters had shown him that survival was not merely about braving the elements, but about finding warmth in shared humanity, and he carried that lesson with every step he took. By the time the day was fully underway, the cowboy felt transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. The cold night had tested him, the warmth of the sisters had healed him, and the morning light had illuminated a new understanding of life, strength, and trust. The sisters, too, felt a quiet joy in seeing him embrace vulnerability, in witnessing him open his heart to care without shame. They didn't need grand gestures or declarations. The simple acknowledgement of shared experience, mutual respect, and quiet companionship was enough to mark the day as extraordinary. And so, the morning ended not with dramatic revelations or grand adventures, but with something deeper, a sense of connection, trust, and mutual respect that would shape their lives in ways that might not be immediately visible but would endure. The cowboy, once proud and isolated, had begun to understand that strength and vulnerability could coexist, and that sometimes the most courageous act was to accept care and warmth from those who genuinely offered it. The sisters, in turn, had witnessed the quiet growth of someone they respected and cared for, knowing that their small acts of kindness had left a lasting mark on his heart. The day had begun like any other, with cold winds and wide-open land, but it ended with lessons that would remain forever. The cowboy had faced hardship, but he had also discovered the value of trust, the power of human connection, and the quiet strength that comes from being part of a supportive circle. The sisters had not only helped him survive the night, but they had shown him a way to live more fully, with openness, courage, and compassion. And in that shared understanding, each of them found a sense of peace that the harsh winds and endless land could never take away. The sun was now higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the land. The cowboy walked between the two sisters, the blankets from the night still wrapped loosely around their shoulders. The wind had softened, carrying the gentle sounds of the countryside, birds calling to each other, the faint rustle of trees, and the distant trickle of a stream. For the first time in many days, the cowboy felt a sense of peace. The cold night and the sisters' care had left a lasting impression on him. He had survived the darkness, but more importantly, he had discovered the quiet power of trust and companionship. As they moved slowly through the open land, the sisters began to share more of their stories. They spoke of their childhood, of days spent learning the ways of the land, of lessons taught not with words but with deeds. The older sister described how their parents had shown them the importance of kindness, courage, and patience. They had taught the sisters to notice small details in nature, the tracks of animals, the smell of approaching rain, the hidden paths that led to water. The cowboy listened intently, fascinated by the depth of knowledge they carried. He realized that their strength was not only in physical endurance, but in wisdom, observation, and understanding. The younger sister added her own memories, sharing stories of playfulness and curiosity. She spoke of the times she had wandered too far, only to be guided back safely by her sister or parents. She talked about learning to laugh even in hard times, finding joy in small victories, and the satisfaction of learning from mistakes. Her stories were lively and full of humor, bringing smiles to the cowboy's face. He had spent so many days alone, focused only on survival, that he had almost forgotten how to simply enjoy life. Listening to the sisters, he remembered the value of lightness, of laughter, and of small moments that make life richer. The cowboy, in turn, began to share pieces of his own past, carefully at first, then more freely. He spoke of long days spent guiding cattle, of nights spent alone under the stars, and of the loneliness that had been his constant companion. He told them about the pride he had always held, believing that independence was the only way to survive. Yet, as he spoke, he began to see the limitations of that pride. The warmth and acceptance from the sisters had softened him, allowing him to open up without fear. For the first time, he realized that vulnerability was not a flaw, but a bridge to connection and understanding. As they walked, they came across a small grove of trees, their branches reaching out like gentle arms. The sisters suggested taking a short rest there, and the cowboy agreed, grateful for the shade and the chance to pause. They settled onto soft grass, and the younger sister began to hum a tune she had learned from her mother. The melody was soft and calming, carrying with it a sense of history and continuity. The cowboy closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him, feeling a deep sense of belonging. It was strange, he thought, how simple sounds and shared presence could bring comfort stronger than any fire or shelter. The older sister spoke again, this time about resilience. She explained that life was full of challenges, some expected, others sudden and harsh. She said that resilience was not about facing hardship alone, but about understanding one's limits, seeking help when needed, and supporting others in turn. The cowboy listened, absorbing every word. He thought about the nights he had spent alone, braving storms and cold winds, and he realized that he had been strong in the wrong way, isolated and burdened rather than connected and supported. The lesson was subtle but profound, planting a seed that would grow quietly in his heart. The younger sister added a perspective on empathy. She told him that noticing the struggles of others, offering help without expecting anything in return, and simply being present for someone in need were forms of strength often overlooked. The cowboy reflected on this, remembering the people he had met along his journey, some who had helped him, some who had ignored him, and realized how powerful it could be to simply care. The sisters were not asking for recognition or thanks. They offered care because it was the right thing to do. The cowboy felt a quiet gratitude for this, recognizing the value of selfless support and connection. The conversation gradually shifted to dreams and aspirations. The cowboy spoke of the small hopes he held for the future, finding a place to call home, being respected for his work, and perhaps one day forming bonds that would last. The sisters shared their own dreams as well, of maintaining the land, honoring their family's traditions, and helping others who might be struggling. The exchange was not boastful or grand. It was honest and heartfelt. Each of them realized that dreams were not just personal ambitions, but a reflection of values, hopes, and the desire to create meaning in life. The cowboy found himself inspired by their clarity and purpose, wishing to integrate some of that wisdom into his own life. The morning moved slowly into afternoon, and the trio continued their journey, walking through open fields and small clusters of trees. The cowboy noticed subtle details in the land that he had overlooked before: the patterns of the grass, the way sunlight fell through branches, the small tracks left by animals. The sisters pointed out these signs, teaching him to read the land as they did. He marveled at their knowledge, realizing how much there was to learn when one paid attention, when one approached the world with curiosity rather than just endurance. Every observation became a shared moment, every insight a quiet bond strengthening between them. As the day progressed, small acts of care continued to deepen their connection. The younger sister offered him food from their provisions, insisting that he eat before continuing. The older sister checked his boots and coat, making sure he remained comfortable for the journey. The cowboy accepted these gestures with a growing sense of ease, no longer feeling the need to resist. He began to understand that accepting care did not diminish his strength, it enhanced it. It allowed him to conserve energy, to think clearly, and to face challenges with a calmer mind and a lighter heart. There were moments of silence, too, where words were unnecessary. They walked together, feeling the rhythm of each other's presence, sharing unspoken understanding. In those moments, the cowboy realized how much he had missed in his solitary life. The simple comfort of companionship, the reassurance of someone noticing your struggles and standing beside you without judgment. The sisters, in turn, recognized his growing trust, and it brought them satisfaction. They had not just helped him survive the night. They were helping him open to life in a new way, to experience the richness of human connection. By late afternoon, they reached a gentle slope overlooking a small valley. The view was breathtaking, with sunlight glinting on the stream below and trees swaying softly in the breeze. The cowboy paused, taking in the beauty, and for the first time he felt a sense of wonder rather than responsibility. The sisters stood beside him, their presence steady and reassuring. He realized that these shared moments, the walks, the conversations, the quiet silences, were forming memories that would last a lifetime. It was not about adventure or heroics. It was about learning to be human, to connect, and to embrace life with openness and gratitude. As the day began to fade into evening, the cowboy felt a subtle but profound change within himself. The lessons of trust, empathy, and resilience were settling into his heart. He understood that his journey had always been about more than survival. It was about learning, growing, and forming meaningful bonds. The sisters had shown him a new way to live, not one of isolation and pride, but one of connection, care, and shared strength. He felt a quiet determination to carry these lessons forward, to remember the importance of kindness, and to honor the trust that had been extended to him. The younger sister glanced at him and smiled softly. "You're learning," she said. The cowboy nodded, realizing that he truly was. The older sister placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture filled with reassurance. He felt a warmth that went beyond the physical, a warmth that came from being understood and accepted. It was a feeling he had longed for but had rarely experienced. And now, in the company of the sisters, he knew it could be part of his life from that moment on. By the time night approached, the three of them had formed a bond stronger than words could fully describe. The cowboy had faced a cold, harsh night and a long, tiring day, yet he emerged transformed, not just by survival, but by understanding the power of compassion, trust, and shared humanity. The sisters had not only helped him endure, they had taught him the value of emotional courage, of listening, of giving and receiving care without shame. The land, once a lonely challenge, now felt like a space where connection and learning could flourish. And in that shared understanding, each of them found a quiet joy that would remain long after the day ended. The sun had fully risen and bathed the land in a warm, golden light. The cowboy walked between the two sisters, feeling a sense of calm he had never known before. The night's cold and the morning's shared stories had left a deep impression on him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the usual weight of loneliness pressing down on his shoulders. Instead, he felt a quiet connection, a bond with the sisters that was more comforting than any fire could be. Each step he took on the soft grass beneath his boots reminded him that life, even in its harshness, could carry moments of unexpected warmth. As they moved across the gentle hills, the sisters continued their quiet guidance, pointing out small signs in the landscape, the tracks of a deer, the burrow of a rabbit, the faint trail where a stream would soon appear. The cowboy watched carefully, noticing details he had often overlooked in his solitary travels. He began to understand that the land had its own language, a language of subtle signs and rhythms. The sisters had long mastered it, and they shared this knowledge patiently, never speaking as though they were teachers, but rather as companions sharing something precious. The cowboy realized that he was learning not only about the land, but about the patience, observation, and mindfulness that came with truly paying attention. Along the way, they found a small clearing with a shallow stream trickling gently through it. The sunlight danced on the water's surface, creating a mosaic of sparkling reflections. The sisters gestured for the cowboy to sit, and they all knelt by the stream, letting the cool water soothe their hands and faces. The cowboy marveled at the simplicity of the moment, how small actions, touching water, feeling the sun on his skin, listening to the gentle sounds of nature, could bring such deep peace. It was a contrast to the harsh, lonely nights he had endured before, and he felt a growing appreciation for the presence of the sisters beside him. The older sister spoke first, her voice calm but strong. She reflected on the lessons the land itself could teach, how to move carefully, how to notice signs, how to understand balance and timing. She emphasized that strength was not merely physical. It was also about wisdom, patience, and the ability to adapt. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that he had relied too heavily on brute endurance in the past. He had survived storms, navigated rough trails, and faced wild animals, but he had rarely paused to learn from his surroundings. Now, with the sisters' gentle guidance, he was beginning to see that survival could be thoughtful, deliberate, and connected to the world rather than only endured in isolation. The younger sister added her own perspective, speaking of empathy, observation, and the subtle power of understanding others. She told the cowboy that noticing the needs of people and animals alike, offering help, and being present in times of need were all forms of quiet strength. The cowboy reflected on her words, thinking about the many times he had judged strength as being silent and solitary. He realized that true courage included openness, trust, and caring for others, and that these qualities did not make a person weak. The sisters' words were not lectures. They were gentle invitations to see life from a broader, more connected perspective. As the day went on, the trio began walking again, the stream now at their side. The cowboy noticed his own movements becoming more relaxed. He no longer felt the tension in his shoulders that had been constant for so many years. The sisters moved with ease, observing the surroundings and guiding him without command, allowing him space to notice things on his own. He began to share small stories from his travels, how he had once been caught in a storm alone, how he had tended to injured animals, how he had learned lessons from mistakes made on the trail. Each story was met with gentle acknowledgement, not judgment. The sisters listened as companions, making him feel respected and understood. He realized how rare that kind of attention was and how deeply it affected him. By midday, the sunlight had grown warmer and the land seemed to hum with life. Birds called to each other from the trees, insects buzzed in the tall grasses, and the breeze carried the scent of earth and water. The sisters encouraged the cowboy to pause and take in the surroundings, to breathe and feel connected. He did, noticing details that had escaped him before: the delicate curve of a leaf, the shimmer of sunlight on the water, the way shadows moved with the wind. He felt a deep sense of awe, realizing that the land was alive in ways he had never truly appreciated. The sisters' presence made him feel safe enough to notice and to wonder, and he found himself grateful for their guidance and companionship. As they continued, the sisters began sharing memories of their own lives, of challenges faced, fears overcome, and lessons learned. The older sister spoke of responsibility, how caring for family, animals, and the land required dedication, compassion, and wisdom. The younger sister spoke of resilience, how laughter, hope, and persistence had helped her through difficult times. Their stories were vivid, full of emotion, and deeply human. The cowboy listened, absorbing every word, realizing that their experiences were mirrors of his own struggles, though shaped differently. He understood that hardship could teach lessons, but only when accompanied by care, reflection, and connection. The cowboy began to feel a sense of belonging he had not known for many years. The sisters had not only offered him warmth during the night, they had opened a door to understanding, connection, and trust. He realized that he had spent much of his life moving alone, believing that asking for help was weakness. Now he understood that it was courage to accept support, to learn from others, and to share his own experiences openly. The realization was both humbling and liberating, and he felt a new energy within him, a willingness to embrace life differently than before. The afternoon passed with quiet, meaningful actions. The trio found a small patch of wildflowers and paused to rest. The sisters encouraged him to notice the beauty around him, to pick a few flowers as keepsakes, and to appreciate life's small gifts. The cowboy obeyed, feeling joy in simple observation. It was not about possession but about appreciation, and he felt a deep sense of connection to the world and to the people beside him. The act was symbolic, a reminder that life could be filled with small, deliberate joys, even amidst challenges. As evening approached, the cowboy realized how much he had changed over the course of the day. The lessons from the sisters, combined with the quiet reflection of the land, had shifted something inside him. He felt lighter, more open, and more aware of the possibilities for connection and growth. The sisters noticed this transformation too, seeing him move with more ease, speak with more openness, and engage with the land with a renewed curiosity. They felt a quiet pride, knowing that their simple acts of care, guidance, and shared presence had made a difference. It was not about grand gestures or heroic deeds. It was about teaching, supporting, and allowing another person to grow. By nightfall, the sky had turned deep blue, and stars began to shimmer in the heavens. The trio found a small, sheltered area to rest, and the cowboy felt a sense of gratitude unlike anything he had known before. He thought about the journey he had taken, not just through the land, but through his own understanding of strength, trust, and connection. He realized that the sisters had offered him more than warmth and protection. They had shown him a path to resilience rooted in compassion, openness, and mutual support. He felt humbled and inspired, understanding that life's challenges could be faced more fully when shared with those who genuinely cared. The younger sister smiled at him softly, noticing the calm expression on his face. "You've changed," she said, her tone gentle but certain. The cowboy nodded, realizing that she was right. The older sister placed a steady hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and respect. He felt a sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. It was not just about surviving the cold night or enduring the day's journey. It was about being understood, respected, and connected. In their presence, he had discovered a new dimension of life, one filled with shared experiences, trust, and quiet joy. As the night settled in, the cowboy reflected on all he had learned. The lessons of resilience, empathy, and openness were not fleeting. They had taken root in his heart. He understood that strength was multifaceted. Physical endurance was important, but emotional courage, the ability to connect, and the willingness to accept care were equally vital. The sisters had not only shown him this truth, but had helped him embody it through their actions and presence. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that the world could be harsh, but that kindness, trust, and companionship could make even the most difficult experiences bearable. The night grew deeper, yet the cowboy felt no fear or loneliness. The stars shone brightly above, reflecting the quiet clarity he now felt within himself. He understood that life would continue to challenge him, that the open land and its unpredictable elements would not be easy to navigate. But he also knew that he had gained something far more valuable than endurance alone, the understanding that connection, empathy, and trust could carry him through the hardest times. The sisters, too, felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that they had helped another soul see the power of compassion, resilience, and shared humanity. And so, the evening ended not with dramatic action, but with a profound transformation. The cowboy had learned that survival was not merely about braving hardship alone, but about embracing life fully, with openness to learning, caring, and trusting others. The sisters had guided him gently, teaching him lessons that would stay with him forever. Together, they had created a space where warmth, understanding, and mutual respect could flourish. And in that space, each of them found a quiet joy that would endure long after the sun had set. The night had long passed, and the first light of dawn spread gently across the land. The cowboy awoke to the soft glow of morning, feeling the warmth of the blankets around him and the presence of the two sisters nearby. The previous night and the following days had left a lasting impression on him, and he felt different, calmer, stronger, and more open than he had in years. The cold that had once seemed impossible to endure now felt distant, replaced by a warmth that came from something deeper than blankets or fire. It came from trust, connection, and understanding, the kind of human bond that is rarely found but treasured forever. He looked at the sisters, who were already awake, quietly preparing for the day. The older sister smiled at him, a gentle, knowing smile that spoke of unspoken trust. The younger sister offered him a piece of bread and a small cup of tea, gestures that reminded him of the quiet kindness that had carried him through the coldest night of his life. The cowboy accepted without hesitation, realizing that he no longer felt the need to hide his vulnerability. He understood now that strength was not about isolation, but about recognizing when to allow others in and how to accept care without shame. As the morning progressed, the trio walked toward a nearby ridge that overlooked a wide valley. The land stretched endlessly, dotted with trees, streams, and the occasional cluster of wildflowers. The cowboy felt a new appreciation for the beauty around him. Each detail, the curve of a hill, the shimmer of sunlight on the water, the patterns of animals in the dirt, carried meaning he had never noticed before. The sisters guided him in observing these details, pointing out subtle signs of life that revealed the land's rhythms. He realized that life, like the land, required attention, patience, and care, and that the lessons of the earth were deeply connected to the lessons of the heart. They paused on the ridge to rest. The cowboy sat quietly, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the long nights spent alone, the endless trails, and the cold winds that had once felt unbearable. He reflected on the pride that had kept him distant from others, and the fear that asking for help would make him weak. Now, looking at the sisters, he understood how wrong he had been. Strength was not about facing hardship alone. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to share life with others. The sisters had taught him this lesson through simple acts: a shared blanket, warm tea, stories told by firelight, and steady presence when words were unnecessary. The younger sister spoke softly, noticing his thoughtful expression. "You've changed," she said. The cowboy nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his chest. "I think I understand now," he replied. Strength isn't just about surviving, it's about living, and about letting others help you when you need it. The older sister reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and solidarity. He felt a warmth in that touch, a confirmation of everything he had learned over the past days. He had not only survived the cold night, he had grown in ways that would stay with him forever. As the sun climbed higher, they began descending into the valley below. The journey was calm but purposeful, each step carrying a sense of reflection and quiet joy. The cowboy noticed how much he had begun to pay attention, not just to the land, but to the presence of the sisters and the subtle lessons they offered with every movement. He began to see life as a series of small, meaningful actions, each one building upon the other to create understanding, connection, and trust. Even simple gestures, a helping hand, a smile, a shared story, carried the weight of human kindness, and he felt grateful to have experienced it firsthand. They stopped by a small stream to rest again. The water was clear and cold, running smoothly over smooth stones. The cowboy knelt and cupped his hands, drinking deeply and letting the cool liquid refresh him. The sisters did the same, sharing in the quiet simplicity of the moment. The cowboy marveled at how ordinary yet profound it felt to simply be present, to share a space without pressure, expectation, or judgment. He realized that life did not always need to be a series of challenges or tests. Sometimes, its greatest lessons were learned in calm, shared moments. The older sister spoke about courage. She explained that real courage was not about facing danger alone or showing off one's strength. It was about honesty, compassion, and the ability to face life fully, with openness to both challenges and support from others. The cowboy listened closely, realizing how much he had misunderstood courage in his own life. He thought of the nights spent braving storms alone, the pride that had isolated him, and the fear that had kept him from forming deeper connections. Now he understood that courage could include trust, connection, and the willingness to accept care without shame. The younger sister added a perspective on hope. She spoke of the small dreams that carried people through difficult times, the hope of friendship, of learning, of laughter, and of human connection. She emphasized that even in the hardest moments, hope could provide warmth and guidance, like a gentle flame in the darkness. The cowboy reflected on her words, realizing that he had always sought strength in isolation, but had overlooked the importance of hope and trust in others. He felt a quiet gratitude for their presence, understanding that their guidance had given him both courage and hope in ways he could not have imagined. As the afternoon continued, the trio reached a small clearing surrounded by tall grasses and wildflowers. The cowboy paused, taking in the view, feeling a deep sense of peace. He noticed the shadows of the trees stretching across the land, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant movement of birds returning to their nests. He realized that life, like the land, had rhythm, balance, and beauty, and that understanding this rhythm required attention, patience, and connection. The sisters had not only guided him through the land physically, They had guided him through a journey of understanding life itself. The cowboy began to speak more freely, sharing thoughts and feelings he had long kept hidden. He talked about his loneliness, his struggles, and his fears. The sisters listened without interruption, offering acknowledgement, smiles, and gentle guidance. He realized that speaking aloud did not make him weak, it made him human. The act of sharing his thoughts created a bond stronger than any hardship he had endured alone. It was a connection built on mutual respect, empathy, and understanding, a connection that would remain with him long after the journey ended. As evening approached, the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the sun dipping toward the horizon. The trio found a comfortable spot to rest, reflecting on the journey they had shared. The cowboy felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the warmth and care he had received, but for the lessons, the connection, and the quiet joy of companionship. He understood that life's greatest challenges could be faced more fully when shared, and that strength was found not only in endurance but in openness, trust, and empathy. The sisters spoke quietly about their hopes for the cowboy, wishing that he would carry the lessons learned into the future. They reminded him that the world could be harsh, but that kindness, trust, and understanding could make even the toughest moments bearable. The cowboy listened, taking their words deeply to heart. He promised himself silently that he would honor these lessons, remembering the warmth, guidance, and support he had received. He knew that his life would be forever changed, shaped by the quiet but profound presence of the two sisters. As night settled over the land, stars appearing in the clear sky, the cowboy felt a sense of completion. The journey had begun with a freezing night, continued through shared stories and understanding, and culminated in a transformation he could feel within himself. He realized that survival was only one part of life. Growth, connection, and empathy were equally important. The sisters had shown him that strength could be gentle, courage could include trust, and resilience could be shared. He felt ready to face the world with a new perspective, carrying the lessons of the journey in his heart. Finally, the cowboy looked at the sisters, seeing them not only as companions but as guides who had helped him discover a new way of living. The night had begun with cold winds and uncertainty, but it ended with warmth, understanding, and hope. He knew that he would never forget this journey, and that the lessons learned would shape every step he took from that moment on. The sisters smiled, satisfied in the knowledge that their quiet acts of care had made a lasting difference. Together, they had created memories that would endure, built on trust, empathy, and the simple yet powerful act of being there for one another. The cowboy took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. He understood now that life was not about facing everything alone. True strength lay in openness, in connection, and in the courage to accept care when it was offered. The sisters had given him that gift, and he knew that he would carry it with him forever. As the stars shone above, he felt a quiet peace, a sense of belonging and a hope that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them not alone, but with the lessons of trust, compassion, and shared humanity guiding him. And so the journey ended, not with fanfare, but with quiet understanding, growth, and the deep satisfaction that comes from human connection. The cowboy had been changed, the sisters had fulfilled their care, and the land had witnessed the quiet unfolding of courage, empathy, and love. It was a memory that would last forever, a reminder that even in the coldest nights and the harshest trials, warmth could be found in trust, care, and shared humanity.